Knicks Nation, welcome back to the channel. I'm your host, Adam. Today we're diving deep into a hot topic that's been buzzing around the fan base. Will Tom Thibodeau finally embrace load management with our newly deep roster? This isn't just about resting players, it's about maximizing our potential for a deep playoff run. Joining me to break this down is top 10 Knicks creator Ryan. Ryan, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Adam. This is definitely a topic that's got Knicks fans talking, and there's a lot to unpack here.
Let's start with the elephant in the room. Thibs' reputation. We've all heard the stories about his intense coaching style and heavy minutes for star players. Ryan, is this reputation fair, or is it outdated?
That's a great question, Adam. Thibs definitely has that reputation, and it's not entirely unearned. He's known for his intense, defense-first approach and for riding his star players hard. But when we look at the facts, especially in recent years, it's not as clear-cut as some might think. For example, in the 2022-23 season, the Knicks were actually one of the healthiest teams in NBA. Several of the injuries that did result in missed games, like RJ's lacerated finger or Randall's sprained ankle, had nothing to do with overuse. This was right in line with Thibodeau's first 2 seasons as Knicks coach.
Interesting. So if the Knicks were relatively healthy in Thibs' first few seasons, what changed last season when we lost 263 player games to injury?
That's where it gets tricky, Adam. We had a perfect storm of injuries last season, but it's hard to pin that solely on Thibs' coaching style. Basketball is a complex sport, and injuries can have countless causes. We have to consider factors like player age, career games played, previous injury history, play style, position, type of injury, cause of injury, time of injury, diet, workout regimen, and so many more variables. It's virtually impossible to definitively prove that Thibodeau's coaching style increases injury risk. We'd need to run a comprehensive data analysis of injuries on Thibs' teams versus every other team, accounting for all these variables. And even then, we'd be missing crucial information about what goes on behind closed doors in terms of practice, intensity, and medical clearances.
That makes sense. It's not as simple as just pointing to minutes played and drawing a direct correlation to injuries.
Exactly. It's worth noting that some of Thibs' reputation might be outdated or exaggerated. Josh Hart, for example, recently stated that Thibodeau's practices are actually light and chill, with most of the time spent on mental preparation rather than physical drills.
That's surprising to hear. Now, let's talk about 2 key players for this upcoming season, OG Anunoby and Mitchell Robinson. Both come with some injury concerns. How do you think Thibs will manage them?
This is where it gets really interesting, Adam. OG has averaged just 52 games over the last 4 seasons, which is concerning for a player we just gave a massive contract to. Reports suggest that OG isn't fond of suiting up if he doesn't feel 100%. Remember that Game 7 against Indiana? OG tried to play on one leg, admirably, but ultimately not effective. With Robinson, interestingly, Thibs has never really pushed him beyond his limits. In 193 games under Thibs, Mitch has played more than 37 minutes only 3 times. After returning from injury last season, Robinson played more than 20 minutes just 3 times in 16 games.
So, do you think we'll see a change in Thibs' approach this season, especially with these 2 players?
I think we might, and a big reason for that is the Knicks' depth this season. For the first time under Thibs, we have a roster bursting with quality rotation players. We're talking about guys who could easily be in the rotation of many teams but might struggle to crack our top 9. This depth could be the key to managing minutes and keeping our stars fresh for the playoffs.
That's a great point. Can you break down what you expect to see this season in terms of minute management?
Sure, Adam. I think we'll see a few key changes. 1. Selective rest games, especially on back-to-backs. The Knicks only have 2 back-to-backs before Christmas, and the second nights of those come against the Bulls and the Wizards. These could be perfect opportunities to rest key players like OG or Robinson. 2. Stricter minute limits for Robinson. Even when he plays, don't be surprised if we see caps on how many consecutive minutes Mitch can be on the floor. 3. Fewer 40-plus minute games for most players. This is where the depth really comes into play.
Let's dive deeper into that last point. How does this compare to last season?
Last season, between the regular season and the playoffs, the Knicks led the league by a wide margin with 40 games where a player played at least 44 minutes. The next closest teams, Philly and Boston, had only 14 such games each. To break it down further, Josh Hart had 14 such games leading the NBA. Deuce McBride had 9. Dante DiVincenzo had 7. Jalen Brunson had 6. OG Anunoby had 4, but 3 of those came in consecutive playoff games against Philly. This is where I think we'll see the biggest change this season. With the addition of Mikal Bridges, the NBA's premier Iron Man, who himself had 5 44-plus minute games last season, Thibs has more options to spread the minutes around.
That's a significant difference. Do you think we'll see the term load management actually used for the Knicks this season?
It's possible, Adam, but I wouldn't bet on it. Aside from OG, most of the Knicks rotation seems to have an if I can walk, I can play mentality. This fits with Thibs' old school approach. So it's hard to imagine DNP rest suddenly becoming a regular sight on Knicks box scores. However, it's worth noting that the Knicks have a new vice president of sports medicine, Casey Smith. Hired away from the Dallas Mavericks, Smith is among the leading voices in the field of sports medicine. His input could be crucial in implementing a more cautious approach to player management.
Interesting. So what's your bottom line here, Ryan? What should Knicks fans expect?
I think we'll see a subtle but significant shift in how Thibs manages minutes this season. It won't be a dramatic change. Thibs is still Thibs after all, but the combination of injury concerns, roster depth, and high expectations might force some adaptations. Here's what I expect to see. More rest for key players on back-to-backs, especially early in the season. Stricter minute limits for Robinson, possibly extended to OG as well. 3. Fewer instances of players logging 40-plus minutes thanks to the team's depth. 4. More willingness to go deeper into the bench, possibly even giving spot minutes to guys like Precious Achiuwa or Deuce McBride. And 5. A quicker hook for stars in blowout games, whether the Knicks are winning or losing.
That makes a lot of sense. Now let's talk about the potential impact of this approach. How do you think it might affect the Knicks' performance?
That's the million-dollar question, Adam. On one hand, fresher legs could mean better performance in close games and a stronger finish to the season. We might see improved efficiency from our key players, especially in the fourth quarter of tight games or in the latter part of the season. On the other hand, there's always the risk of disrupting chemistry or losing winnable games by resting key players. Basketball is a rhythm sport, and sometimes taking players out of their routine can have unintended consequences. Ultimately, it's going to be a balancing act. Thibs will need to weigh the short-term goals of winning regular season games against the long-term aim of having a healthy, energized team for a deep playoff run.
Speaking of the playoffs, do you think this potential change in approach is driven by the Knicks' postseason aspirations?
Absolutely, Adam. The Knicks aren't just trying to make the playoffs anymore. They're aiming for a deep run. Last season, we saw how injuries can derail a promising postseason. By the end of our run, we had just one fully healthy player from our normal rotation. If the Knicks can enter the playoffs with a fully healthy roster, that could be the difference between a first-round exit and a conference finals appearance. And let's not forget, a well-rested Julius Randle or Jalen Brunson could be the key to winning a tight series.
That's a great point. Before we wrap up, Ryan, what's the one thing you'll be watching for early in the season to gauge if Thibs is indeed changing his approach?
Great question, Adam. I'll be closely watching how Thibs manages minutes in back-to-back games, especially for players like OG and Robinson. If we see strategic rest or reduced minutes in these scenarios, it could indicate a shift in Thibs' philosophy. I'll also be paying attention to how deep into the bench Thibs goes in the first quarter of games. If we see 10 or 11 players getting meaningful minutes early in games, that could be a sign that Thibs is committed to spreading the workload more evenly.
Fascinating stuff, Ryan. Now, let's engage our listeners. To everyone tuning in, we want to hear from you. Do you think we'll see a new load management-friendly Thibs this season? Or will it be business as usual? How would you manage the minutes if you were in Thibs' shoes?
Those are great questions for the listeners, Adam. And I'd add one more. How much load management are you comfortable with as a fan? Would you be okay with sitting Brunson or Randle for a winnable regular season game if it meant they were fresher for the playoffs?
Excellent point, Ryan. Listeners, share your thoughts in the comments section below. We love hearing from you and might even feature some responses in our next episode.
And remember, whether Thibs embraces load management or sticks to his guns, Our goal remains the same, bringing the championship back to New York. This Knicks team has the potential to make some real noise in the playoffs if they can stay healthy.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Any final thoughts, Ryan?
Just that this season is shaping up to be one of the most exciting in recent Knicks history. We have depth, we have star power, and we have a coach who's proven he can win in New York. How Thibs manages the minutes could be the X factor that takes us from good to great.
Well said. Thanks for joining us, Ryan, and thanks to all our listeners. Remember to like, subscribe, and leave a comment if you enjoyed the show. We'll be back next week with more in-depth Knicks analysis. Until next time, let's go Knicks.